So last year I asked Holland America if they would repeat their 2023 Ultimate Alaska Cruise Itinerary. And you know what? They replied. And they're doing it again for 2024 and 2025. But is it as good as it could be? Is there a way to make it better? And what if you don't have 30 days to dedicate to a cruise? Is there something maybe a little shorter that gets you close to an ultimate Alaska cruise? Oh, you know there is, otherwise I wouldn't be recording this video. Let's check it out. Hey, welcome to This is the Cruise. I'm Clint, and this is the channel where we look at upcoming cruise itineraries and try to find out if this is the cruise for you. Today, we're looking at 14-day and longer Alaskan cruise itineraries. So here's what we're going to cover. Holland America has a 28-day Alaska Arctic Circle Solstice. It's kind of hard to say. 28-day Alaska Arctic Circle Solstice. A 28-day Alaska Arctic Circle Solstice cruise. Yeah, that's right. They're doing it in 2024, and then they're doing it again in 2025. But I noticed there's a couple of differences. And then Holland also has two 14-day Alaskan cruise itineraries for 2024 that we'll look at. And then when I was doing some research, I was surprised to see that there was actually a couple of cruises by Carnival that were 14 days. So I thought we should check those out too for fun. You never know, there may be some surprises in there, so stay tuned. But of course we have to set some boundaries because we could be here all day looking at Alaskan cruise itineraries. So here's what we're not going to be talking about. Anything that's by an expedition cruise line. So your Nat Geos or your Hurtigrutens, those have some amazing, very immersive itineraries, and one day I would love to take one of those. They're very expensive, but they look amazing. We're not going to talk about those. Also, some of the lines, Princess, for example, also do these 7-day cruise up and 7-day cruise back, and you can buy them as a 14-day itinerary. That's fine if those stops going north and stops coming back south were different. However, they're not different. They're the same stops. So we're not looking at any of those where you're repeating 7 days up and repeating 7 days back. I think you can do better for an Alaska 14-day cruise. There's too much to see to keep repeating the same itinerary over and over again. All right, so we're not doing those. The other thing we're not going to cover are land tours that make a cruise itinerary longer. Holland America has these. If you go to Celebrity's website and look at their longest Alaskan itineraries, they'll have these 13-day itineraries, but a decent amount of time is spent doing a land tour. Say you fly up to Fairbanks, take a train down through Denali or a different tour down through Denali, spend some time there and come on down. I'm not discounting those types of itineraries. They also look amazing. It gives you a chance to get inland in Alaska. That's great. We're not talking about those itineraries here. We're talking about getting on a ship, unpacking once from your embarkation port, cruising for 14 or more days, and ending back at your embarkation port where you can head home. And there are some great itineraries to look at. So before we get to our first itinerary, I just wanted to say, if you appreciate the content, I'd appreciate a like. If you're learning something new or if it's helping you out, I appreciate the subscribe. And if this has helped you pick an itinerary, you can buy me a cup of coffee. There's a link in the description below, a secure way to say thank you. You can make a little donation, keeps the content coming, and I really appreciate it. So here we have the 28-day Alaska Arctic Circle Solstice for 2024 on Holland America's Westerdam ship. We're gonna leave from Seattle, which is a great cruise port to cruise from. You have the skyline in the distance with Mount Rainier off on the horizon. It's a great place to leave. And then you cruise out from Seattle. And then you're gonna spend a day scenic cruising the Inside Passage, which is also beautiful. Obviously, you're not gonna get off the ship. And instead of just having a day at sea, a lot of the itineraries don't cruise the Inside Passage. They just make their way around it. So you kind of go out more into the ocean. Here you have this calm, peaceful cruise up as you make your way to Ketchikan. It can be hard to tell and schedules can change, but it is likely that you will be right here, right where you can get off the ship and go explore the city. From here, you're going to cruise up to Sitka And this is one where you most likely are going to be stopped, if you're looking at the screen, at Old Sitka State Park, or kind of down in that area. That's where the cruise port is, and then they bus passengers. It's free down to the city. Sitka is one of my favorite stops to stop at in Alaska. I love this small town. It's got a lot of charm. Some of the best salmon I've ever had in my life is here. But it's Alaska, you're gonna find that everywhere, which is great. So then we're gonna have our first of many glacier cruises. We're gonna cruise Hubbard Glacier, which is beautiful. And then we're gonna make our way up to Prince William Sound and do some more cruising for some more glaciers as we make our way to Valdez, which I've not been to, but look, it's surrounded by the mountains. It's beautiful. Here we're gonna be able to actually get off the ship and explore and start getting into some more northern central Alaskan culture. Then we're going to spend another day cruising College Fjord. Again, more beautiful Alaskan glaciers here as we continue to make our way north towards Seward, Alaska, where we will have a stop. One thing I want to point out about Seward is a lot of cruise lines, and we will actually see that happen later in this video, stop here at Seward and say it's a jumping off point for Anchorage. It is, but Anchorage is over the mountains behind Seward. It's not like it's right there. So you have to get transportation, book an excursion if you want to go up to Anchorage. This itinerary though, maybe has some surprises in store for us as we continue on. So we spend time in Seward, then we make our way all the way around the archipelago to Dutch Harbor, which is one of the most intriguing stops. I think this is obviously of Deadliest Catch fame, which is very cool. I didn't know this, but it was also one of the only places on US soil that was bombed during World War II, which is fascinating. There's a ton of history for history buffs here, a lot of activities to do if you're a nature lover, which is great. I just want to check out the Deadliest Catch area, which just looks so cool. From here, we're actually going to have a day at sea as we make our way up and cross the Arctic Circle. I've not been north of the Arctic Circle. I've gotten close, but I've not actually crossed it. So we're going to cruise across the Arctic Circle, and then we're going to cruise around Little Diomede Island. You're not actually going to get off the ship. Hurtigruten and some of the expedition cruises will stop here. However, there's a tiny population here. We don't want to disturb the locals. And I think that's important. One thing that's interesting of note though is that Big Diomede Island, which you see not too far away in the distance here, that's actually Russian territory. So you'd be cruising right by Russia as you cruise by Little Diomede Island, which is a very interesting stop. Then we're gonna have another day at sea as we cruise over to the mainland again and have our really true northern Alaskan stop here in Nome, Alaska. This is about as legit as it gets. And I'm glad that the itinerary stops here because you just don't have this opportunity very often to be this far north in Alaska and visit. From here, we're going to make our way to Kodiak. So we had that northern Alaska cultural experience, got to get up into the wilderness a bit. And then Kodiak really is known for wilderness. So while there is a city here, it's a small city, it's really known for its bears and seals and a fantastic stop that we may be seeing on other itineraries as we make our way through here. Then we're going to actually go to Anchorage. We're not just going to go to Seward and say it's Anchorage. We're actually going to go to Anchorage. And not only are we going to go and just have a day here, we're actually going to have 2 days here. So you have an overnight, which sets you up nicely to be able to actually go inland and spend time going further into Alaska itself on an expedition or explore. And the other thing to note is this is right around the summer solstice. So you'll be in Alaska June 26th. It's not the longest day of the year, but the sun sets at 11:42, 11:43 this night in Anchorage. There's plenty of daylight to get out and explore the countryside, which is great. And then you get back and then you get to do it all over again or do something else the next day. From there, we're gonna make our way down to Homer, which is very cool. Again, great place to get some seafood and explore more of the Alaskan culture. From here, we're actually gonna have a day at sea as we make our way over to Glacier Bay. Glacier Bay is one of my favorite stops in Alaska, if not my favorite stop. I think everyone who goes to Alaska needs to visit Glacier Bay. It's a US national park. They limit the number of cruise ships that can actually go in and visit to 2 per day. And the National Park Service requires that park rangers board the ship while you're cruising and remain on the ship while you're cruising Glacier Bay. What that means is that you actually get a tour guide with park rangers around talking to you, doing presentations, making the experience so much better. You don't get that in any of the other glaciers, and there may be a number of other ships visiting some of these glaciers while you're there, but not here at Glacier Bay. I love it and highly, highly recommend Glacier Bay on any itinerary. From here, we're going to make our way over to Haines, Alaska, and this would be the second most disappointing stop I have with this itinerary. Unfortunately, they're not going to Skagway. This is a jumping off point to Skagway. They actually refer to it as Haines and then in parentheses Skagway, but you can see Skagway in the distance. It's not next door, so you're most likely booking an itinerary, taking a boat over there. Skagway is where you have the train that goes up the mountainside. It's beautiful and it is the thing to do. However, we're going to be in Haines. Now, Haines is nothing against Haines. It's a small village in a small town, so it's more immersive and way less touristy than Skagway. So it's got that going for it. But given the diversity of this itinerary, it's unfortunate that we're not actually going to Skagway. Ketchikan is similar to Skagway in the vibe. It feels very touristy, and we kind of kicked off the itinerary with Ketchikan. It would be kind of nice to have something that's a little bit more vibrant like that, but we're missing out on the train is sort of the downside with this itinerary. Where do we go from here? Well, after Haines, we're going to make our way to Juneau. So after Haines, we make our way to Juneau. Juneau, again, is a great stop. We'll be docked right here in the city with the waterfalls coming down, which is great. I definitely recommend checking out Mendenhall Glacier. You don't need to book a tour. You can just get off the ship. They have buses going. You just buy a ticket for the bus. It's going to be $20, $30. It'll take you right to Mendenhall Glacier. It'll pick you up and bring you back and explore it on your own. There's plenty to walk, plenty of hiking. It's great. So highly, highly recommend Mendenhall Glacier right here in Juneau, and then stop and get some food, get something to enjoy the town. Then from here, we're actually going to go to Tracy Arm and do some more glacier cruising, which is so cool. This gets to be closer, not quite, but a little closer to the feeling of Norway. There's one more stop we have coming up here, which is Misty Fjords National Monument. And this is about as close as you're going to get to a Norwegian fjord in Alaska. The narrows get kind of tight together. It's beautiful. It's very calm and very relaxing and peaceful cruise here. Then we do have what I referenced was potentially the most disappointing stop, which is Prince Rupert. Nothing against Canada or my Canadian friends. I love you all, but it's a required stop that we stop in Canada. We can't just cruise from Seattle. We have to stop somewhere in a foreign country. It's just the way it is. There's not much to do here in Prince Rupert. There are some coffee shops and kind of seaside things. It looks like we're going to be here all day. The way it's scheduled is from 8 to 5. I know when we had our stop in Victoria, they were running late, and we ended up only getting in the afternoon and then leaving in the evening. We did get to see fireworks. We were there on Canada Day, which was kind of cool. But it's one of those stops where you're not spending a ton of time, and there's just not that much to do at this point, especially after everything that we just got doing on this itinerary, which is pretty amazing. From here, then, we're actually going to have another day at sea before we make our way back to Seattle. So looking at this itinerary, this is quite the agenda, going from Seattle, making our way all the way up through Southeast Alaska, over to Central Alaska, over to Western Alaska, all the way up to Nome, cruising around Little Diomede Island, and then making our way back. Pretty amazing stuff. So for Clint's cruisability score, I've got a new thing I'm rolling out. I'm just fine tuning some things here, but we're going to stick with it for comparative purposes for this episode. For Clint's cruisability score, this itinerary gets a 47.31. If you were to break it down by cost, an inside cabin, which I don't know that I'd recommend an inside cabin on this itinerary. The inside cabin's $5,500. A balcony is $87.50. It's not cheap, but it's also a month long. So if we break that down, the dollar amount, your value is $116 for the score for an inside cabin, and Clint's cruisability score, a balcony, is at $185. I don't know if that's good or bad. Let's compare it to the 2025 itinerary and see what we get. So this is actually pretty easy to do. There's really only one thing that's different here. Instead of cruising misty fjords, well, there's actually two things that are different here. Before crossing the Arctic Circle, you're going to stop at Nome, and then you're going to cross the Arctic Circle and go around Little Diomede Island. So there's a little bit of a shift in the timing of the port stops as you go from Dutch Harbor to Nome, and a minor shift. Otherwise, all of the stops are the same except for one change, and that change actually has to do with misty fjords. You won't be cruising misty fjords. You'll actually be cruising to Wrangell. So Wrangell, you can kind of see here in the distance. It looks great, and what I want to point out is you're actually going to be coming from Juneau, going to Tracy Arm, and then you're going to go to Wrangell, and then you're going to head on down to Prince Rupert. You're not going to be cruising over through the misty fjords. You can see there's a lot of similarity there. However, you do have an extra day where you get to get off the ship. And Wrangell looks like a very nice stop. It's much less touristy than the other stops. So I personally prefer this. I would prefer to get off the ship. We've done so many glaciers. It's great, and Misty Fjords is different. There are more glaciers and more waterfalls, and can you really ever get enough of that? I don't think you can. However, I think I want to get off the ship and see something else. But that's just me. So where does this land with the Clint's cruisability scores? So this one does tick up. This gets a Clint's cruisability score of 52.84. From a cost perspective, though, it's $4,700 for an inside room, and a balcony is $9,100, $9,200 for a balcony. It's still a little bit more expensive. Of course, prices haven't come down. We're still over a year out, and we expect those to kind of make their way down a little bit. But when you break it down by score, Clint's cruisability cost is $88 for an inside room. And because we go up in points for the score, it's actually a better value for the balcony. Clint's cruisability cost for the balcony is $173. So that actually makes it a little bit better value. And I like kind of looking at it like this because we're assigning a dollar amount to the score, which, you know, tells us a bit of a different story here. So between these two, I think the 2025 itinerary is a little bit better, but it's, again, 28 days. That's a lot. So what are some other options that we have? Well, wouldn't you know it, there's actually a Carnival cruise that leaves from Los Angeles. It's a 14-day. We have 3 days at sea. Then we go to Sitco, Juna, Skagway, Icy Strait Point, cruise Tracy Arm, which we looked at, Ketchikan. Then we go to Prince Rupert, and then we have 3 days as we come back. I want to point out two things. One, we've looked at all of those stops already. That 28-day goes to every single one of those. So that's cool. The other thing that I want to point out is that this itinerary is identical to many 7-day itineraries. But you have 3 days at sea just to get up to Alaska and 3 days at sea to get all the way back down to Southern California. This itinerary is clearly for you in SoCal, right? Like that, it's for you. And that's great. There are better Alaskan itineraries out there. This one gets a Clint's cruisability score of 23.08. A balcony is $1,600 and an inside cabin's $1,100. That gives us a $69 ratio for a balcony and a $48 ratio for the inside cabins. That's not bad. And it's certainly a better value than what we saw for the 28-day, which is interesting. But it's 6 days at sea, 6 ports. That's not a great variety there, which is unfortunate. However, if I lived in Southern California and if I came across this cruise at like half that price, I think I'd be all about it, because why not? You know, especially if I had the time off, I'd say go for it. So that being said, I say way to go, Carnival, for trying to do something different. Everybody's leaving from Vancouver. Everybody's leaving from Seattle. They're throwing out a Los Angeles itinerary. Great job there. Okay, so what are some other options? Well, we do have a 14-day Great Alaska Explorer on the Noordam in September of 2024. This one leaves from Vancouver, has 2 days at sea, goes to Anchorage, and just like that 28-day, actually has an overnight in Anchorage, which is so cool. Then you go to Kodiak, which is also cool. Then you go to Valdez, which is also cool. Then you have a day at sea. You cruise Glacier Bay. We've already talked about that. It's one of my favorites. You go to Skagway proper. You can take the train. Great. Then you go to Sitka. Then you go to Ketchikan. Then you have a stop at Prince Rupert. I don't understand. We left from Vancouver. We actually don't need to make this stop. If this itinerary takes one big hit, it's that right there, which is unfortunate. We then have a and don't get me wrong, Prince Rupert's fine. It gets mixed reviews. The people are wonderful, just to be clear. But we shouldn't have to stop at another Canadian stop. Then after leaving Prince Rupert, we're going to make our way down Inside Passage, which is another bonus before we get back to Vancouver. This one gets a Clint's cruisability score of 31.95. We have 3 days at sea, 8 ports, and 2 technically scenic cruises, but only one of them is a glacier cruise. The cost here, you're looking at about, at the time of filming, $2,600 for a balcony, and for an inside cabin, about $1,225. That gives us a Clint's cruisability score for a balcony of $81.38 and a Clint's cruisability cost of $38.34 for an inside room. That's a pretty good value there as well, particularly when we compare it to the itinerary that leaves from Los Angeles. Okay, so saying that Carnival and Holland America, trying to compare those two types of cruises, isn't necessarily fair. I mean, Holland America is owned by the Carnival Corporation, so is Carnival Cruise Lines, which makes sense. The ship experience is going to be different. I've cruised both Carnival and Holland a number of times, many times. I think just this year we have now cruised Holland America more than we've cruised Carnival. They were a great cruise line for me and my family as our kids were growing up. Lots of great activities. They're great. So if you have younger kids and want to go on an Alaskan cruise, I think Carnival actually gives you some benefits because their kid activities, their activities for young kids are better than on Holland America. But if you're an adult and have adult children like myself, or if you're going to cruise with your parents, or or just it's going to be you and your significant other cruising, I think the experience is going to be better on Holland. But the question is, does Carnival have anything that leaves from the Seattle-Vancouver area? And they do. So let's look at that. So this way we don't have to spend 3 days at sea. So we have a cruise on Carnival. It's on the Carnival Spirit that leaves from Seattle. They're actually doing this itinerary twice. They do change up the order a little bit here, but they're doing it twice in 2024. So that's great. You can pick which itinerary works best for you for your schedule. You're going to leave from Seattle, have a sea day, cruise Tracy Fjord. Then you're going to go to Skagway. You're going to go to Juneau, Icy Strait Point, Hubbard Glacier, so that gives you 2 glaciers of cruising. Then we're going to go to Seward. We're not going to go to Anchorage. They're going to say they're going to Anchorage, but they're actually going to Seward. Then you're going to have a sea day, going to go to Sitka, and then Ketchikan, have a sea day, and come back to Victoria, which makes sense. We have to stop in a Canadian port because we're leaving from Seattle. I get it. That makes sense. That other itinerary in Holland America, what are they thinking? I don't know. I don't understand. I like this better. Victoria actually has a little bit more to do. So if you're there for a longer period of time, you have some more options. So this itinerary, I actually kind of like this itinerary. It gets a Clint's cruisability score of 31.07. We have 3 days at sea, 7 ports. It's 1 less port than the Holland America one, but we actually have an extra proper glacier cruise. We're not cruising the Inside Passage here though, unfortunately. The cost is about $1,600 for a balcony. An inside cabin's about $1,000. That gives us a Clint's cruisability cost score for a balcony of $51.49, $51.50, and a Clint's cruisability score cost for an inside room at $33.79. Good solid values here. And like I said, I think the differentiator here between going on a Holland 14-day and going on a Carnival 14-day itinerary is solid enough that I would feel totally comfortable bringing my younger, say tweens and preteens and younger kids on this cruise because they're going to have a lot more for them to do. And we're going to have a good time with this itinerary. Okay, so we have one more itinerary, and Holland America does have one more itinerary. It's the 14-day Great Alaskan Explorer, same name as the other one, but this one leaves in May on the Noordam. So the first one we talked about on Holland America leaves in September. This one leaves in May, and that tells us that they are doing these 14-day cruises during the shoulder seasons. That's leaving the rest of the season open for 7-day itineraries. That makes sense. They sell faster, they're easier to do and turn the ship around. They can book more of them. 14 days is a long time to commit to a 14-day itinerary. I get it. So you have a May itinerary and you have a September itinerary to pick from. This one leaves from Vancouver, all right? So we're leaving from Canada. We have 2 days at sea as we make our way up to Seward. That's not our Anchorage stop. We then cruise the next day to Anchorage. We then cruise to Kodiak, then Valdez, then we have a sea day, then we make our way down to Juneau, then Skagway, then we cruise the Endicott Arm and Dawes Glacier, then we make our way to Wrangell, then we make our way to Ketchikan, and then we cruise the Inside Passage down back to Vancouver. So there's some differences here, right, between the May and the September cruise. This one in May, we don't get to go to Glacier Bay, but Dawes Glacier and Endicott Arm are beautiful stops. It's just you don't get the national park experience, which is a downside, right? That would be the con. On the plus side, this does visit Juneau, and we do have a full day in Anchorage. So you get the capital city and you get Alaska's largest city in this itinerary, which gives us some bonuses here. Again, same amount of sea days, same amount of ports, 3 sea days, 8 ports, and we also get to cruise Inside Passage. Okay, so this is the cruise. Well, obviously the 28-day. I think the 2025 itinerary is a little bit better than 2024 itinerary. A little bit better, depending on the price that you get. Either one's going to be great. I would take either one, and I'm so glad Holland is doing these itineraries again. Absolutely. I am very grateful for that. I hope someday to be able to go on these. Unfortunately, our cruise itineraries are booked through 2025. So I don't see us being able to do either of these. Maybe 2026. Bring it back, Holland. Bring it back. You count me, put me down for one of those would be great. The 2024 itineraries, though, are a little bit tougher to pick. As we talked about some of the differences between the Holland itinerary and the Carnival itinerary really comes down to mostly the ships, right? So let's set that aside, understand that, and kind of put that in our back pocket over here. And let's look at the data. So the May sailing has Juneau. It doesn't have an obligatory Canada stop, which automatically helps out the score. It has the same amount of ports, but all around, it's a little bit better. We don't get that Anchorage stop, but we do have a little bit more diversity in our stops. That tends to play in the itinerary's favor. May also has more adventure and more enrichment opportunities. However, the September itinerary is a little bit more relaxing. So if you're wanting something where you can just chill after a hectic summer, then maybe the September itinerary would be the itinerary for you. And finally, May is a much better value. I really wanted to pick the itinerary because I love Glacier Bay so much, and I love the idea of having an overnight in Anchorage. May just comes out ahead if we look at the data. It gives us a better value. There's more score for the dollar spent. So we have to do the 14-day Alaskan Explorer sailing on May 5th on the Noordam. Goes to Anchorage and Seward. Goes to Wrangell instead of a second Canada stop. The cons are we don't have the overnight in Anchorage, but the biggest miss is missing Glacier Bay. But we still get a great glacier experience. Thank you so much. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. We'll see you next time.